So we look at irritable bowel syndrome. There's two lenses to look at these. Again, there's the Western lens, like the allopathic, standardized Western medical lens, and then the functional medicine lens. In the Western lens, irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease are two different things. Irritable bowel syndrome, not really classified with inflammation, but a lot of symptoms: bloating, pain, constipation, diarrhea, whatever it might be, food sensitivities, etc. That's irritable bowel syndrome, where things can irritate you. Maybe you got rapid transit time. You got to watch what you eat. That's the syndrome. But then there's inflammatory bowel disease, which has inflammation. You have inflammatory markers. You can get ulcers in the colon. That's inflammatory bowel disease, has two branches. You have Crohn's disease, which is anything from mouth to anus. You can get ulcers and sores in your mouth, your stomach, your small, large intestine. They happen to come in these, we call Peyer's patches. And so it's your intestine's sort of inflamed in patches like a Dalmatian. It's kind of all over the place, a bit randomized. Well, then there's the colitis, which tends to go more in strips, where it's, say, 18 centimeters of your large intestine. Say we call proctitis is one of the most common. So that's just the lower rectum is inflamed, and it's very surface level. Whereas Crohn's disease goes deep into the tissues. It really burrows into the walls of the intestines. And so then you have your Crohn's disease, mouth to anus, deep. Then you have your surface level colitis, large intestine. And then you have your ulcerative colitis, where again, like your heel, wearing in a shoe, rubs till it's red, blisters, and bleeds. So you have these degrees of colitis, where there's ulcers or not, but it's all inflamed. And both of these can have symptoms of pain, blood, mucus, diarrhea, constipation, food sensitivities, all kinds of things. Now, what I look at these for my personalized definition, this is where I think we really broken the mold, or broken what was being molded in Western medicine, to change our ideology behind bowel disease. Western medicine has spent a lot of time differentiating, saying IBS and IBD are dramatically different. But something like 17% of all IBD cases, so your Crohn's and colitis diagnoses, the ones who are seen and treated with a label by a doctor, 17% of them have a previous diagnosis of IBS. Well, that's a diagnosis, but we know a lot of things go undiagnosed. For example, we got people, if we look at the stats from North America, right? We'll use the USA as an example for the CDC, lots of data there. Up to 72% of all Americans, depending on the sample size, 60 to 72%, will complain of having some kind of gut issue once a week. So constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloat, pain, something of the sort. That's their complaint. Now, out of that 72%, so we got what, 350 plus million Americans. So let's say there's 270 million of them complaining of some kind of gut issue. Well, a much smaller percentage actually has an IBS diagnosis. And so if we look at statistically how many people actually have a diagnosis of IBS, and then how many go from IBS to IBD, it's not hard to draw the conclusion that someone can progress from IBS to IBD, diagnosed or not, relatively quickly. Back to the wear and tear. So my hypothesis was, I don't think IBD is this random condition. It's not this thing that comes out of the blue, Crohn's and colitis. It's the people who start today with a little bit of acid reflux, a little bit of discomfort. What does their doctor do? Well, they give them antacids. Well, what do antacids do? They suppress acid. Well, the number one cause in my practice I see of acid reflux is actually low stomach acid. I got another episode on that to dive into it. But the short of it is your sphincters are controlled by pressure and acid. If you don't have it, you get reflux because they open up. And so you come in, you got bloat, acid reflux. You go to your doctor and you get antacids. Well, now you're not digesting, breaking down, and absorbing properly. You get undigested food coming through the intestines. It causes a bit of hyperfermentation. Those sphincters open up. So now you get bacteria flowing back and forth uncontrolled. Now your assembly line is not in check and balance. You're starting to get the products at the end of an assembly line you don't want because things aren't done properly. And so at the end of the day, you get people who now have gut issues. They now have more bloat because bacteria is getting in there. They now have more dysfunction. You have fungal overgrowth. They have dysfunction because they're not breaking down, digesting, absorbing. So their nutrients are now depleted. And now they go back to their doctor. Things are getting worse. Maybe they do or don't get a diagnosis of IBS. Maybe they just take over-the-counter prescriptions or medications for the next 15 years until one day they're like, oh, I got blood in my stool. I better see a doctor. Most men will wait a year before going to the doctor with blood in their stool. And they go in now and they go, oh, it's ulcerative colitis or it's Crohn's disease. You must have had this the entire time. It just finally got worse. And so what did we do is we went in and said, well, your heel is blistering. You must have always had this blister, but the shoe probably had nothing to do with it. They will say your diet had nothing to do with it. The medication had nothing to do with it. We just look at this like it's this arbitrary condition, but it doesn't make any sense. We can clearly see the breakdown in the process. And what I did is I went, okay, what if IBS and IBD are the same? Because the symptoms are almost identical. It's just a matter of severity, right? What was happening in your shoe changes the progression. You get somebody with glass and sand in their shoe, the shoe is wet, there's no socks, the shoe's too small, you're going to blister quicker than someone with a good fitting shoe. That makes sense, right? And so I said, what if IBS and IBD are the same thing? What if it's just a progressive wear and tear? And lo and behold, we got people going back in history. Many of them have this wear and tear where I'll have my gallbladder removed. And then I got IBS. And over 15 years, I finally got colitis.